Okay, as Anne said, this was my PhD study, which I completed in 2011. So I'm hoping that it's still fairly relevant and of interest to anybody who's thinking of doing research and wants to engage with a hard-to-reach group, as they're sometimes referred to. So, here we go. The overview of what I want to talk about is who are the hard-to-reach. What is engagement and what does that mean? The principles of engagement which I used in this particular study, the background to my study, some of the challenges, where the participants actually came from and a bit of their detail whenever I actually got into my study, some of consent issues, some of the data collected, and finally what does any form of success look like. Now, depending on where you're coming from, so for example, if you're an employer and you're talking about a hard-to-reach group, that means something completely different from the health and social care aspects. And the NHS in England have their own labels or categories or whatever way you want to form them, and they have devised who they call are hard-to-reach, and this is the list that they have devised. At the very bottom there you will see the victims of domestic abuse is how they term that particular category of people. Categories is one of the terms you use in grounded theory, so I apologise, that's how we term different populations and categories. I would say families where there has been violence and abuse. So it's not just the victim. In every family there's a victim or a perpetrator and onlookers, which is where the study that I did, where all of that came from. And in engagement, my colleague is Dr. Gail Johnson in the office, and she is the person who has responsibility for PPI and involvement. And she said, Ruth, you need to put this slide in. You have to show people the difference between involvement and participation. Now, we are all very, very signed up to having patient involvement, and that means active involvement right from the very, very outset of service users and the public in research decisions. So an academic person or a clinical person can come up with a wonderful idea, take it across to people who are service users or carers or the public, and they can have a completely different slant on it. And that completely different slant is extremely important to us because we're so absorbed in our own day-to-day business that we don't see your slant on it sometimes. We think we're doing our very best to help and support people in whatever their situations are, but we need your input. Your input is so important. Without that, research can fail and fail appallingly. What I wanted and what I want to talk about is actual participation, and that is the volunteering for research studies as a subject. So this is me, this bit I am wanting to talk about. Engagement, then, what is it? Engagement consists of informing, consulting, involving, listening, and responding to communities through ongoing relationships. And that word relationship is a key word. It is a relationship between whoever is doing the research and whoever is coming forward to give their evidence and data and time and effort. Engaging with vulnerable groups and communities that are seldom heard and responding to their needs will help tackle inequalities. And ineffective engagement leads to services that fail to meet the needs and wants of local people and a disillusioned, cynical local population that has little trust in the NHS. That came from the NHS Act in 2006 in the Department of Health, and it is relevant now. That's 10 years ago as it was then. We want to tackle inequalities. We want to make sure that the people who don't have every opportunity to have their voices heard, that they can participate in research, they can contribute, and they can help us to make a difference. The principles of engagement then that I used within my research was, first of all, the establishment of contact. And I found very quickly that I needed to use a range of methods and give people different options. So I suppose in my innocence or naivety, when I set out on my study, I thought everybody would want to speak to me face to face. I'm such a nice person to engage with and talk to and give their opinions, but not one size fits all. And I think people who have worked in services long enough know that when somebody picks up the telephone, they want to tell you there and then, right now, what's happening in their lives. It doesn't matter if you have a million other things going on, or if you're in the middle of some other busy piece of work, you have to give them your time there and then. And that's what I found too. Not one size fits all. So I gave people the option of meeting me face to face if that's what they wanted. A lot of people communicated to me by text or by telephone, and some of them were, about 3 of the people that I did interview said, no, I don't want an appointment to come back and see you. I want to tell you right now what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling, and that's it. So you have to make accommodation for that as far as possible. I think I lost one person who, just for whatever circumstances, I could not talk to her then. I might have been driving or doing something. I said, look, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you just now. Can I phone you back? No, if you don't want to speak to me now, that's it. And I had to leave it. It just wasn't doable. So the other options then is to make the appointment or come straight in and talk. And it is difficult if somebody wants to tell you right now, because I needed to record what they were saying. It's impossible to memorise, obviously, everything that's being said, and it is so impossible. The other thing is, when people are talking to you on the telephone from Northern Ireland, they speak too quickly. And there is no way on this earth that you could write down everything that somebody is saying to you. And at the same time, if you're recording it, all they need to do is give a cough or a poor reception on a landline, or a lorry in the background for some reason, and that cuts out some of the key information that you're trying to record. So what I did was I recorded and I jotted down notes at the same time, just to be sure. Another technique that I used was snowballing. And for those people who haven't used snowballing, it's quite good to get your numbers up if that's what you're wanting, if you're in a group that's hard to get engagement with. And what happens is, if one person comes forward and says, yes, I know 2 or 3 other people who have had similar situations, and I will give you a card and they'll take it away and pass that on to the next person, so then they can contact you and arrange to speak with you as well. It's a good way of engaging people, but also there are some pitfalls with that, and I'll talk about that later on. One thing I learned in this particular instance was the person at the point of contact is the only person that person wants to speak to. So there's no point in me speaking to them and saying, I'll pass you on to my assistant and she'll make contact with you. You have to do the deal right from the start to the very, very end, because people do not want, especially in this situation, do not want to have to give stories and circumstances and details all over again. You have to be very non-judgmental. You have to be very careful that some of the language you use doesn't come across as judgmental. You have to take reality checks that sometimes what you think you can't come straight out with. Why didn't you leave him? Why did you not just do this? That can't be a part of your interview technique, because you lose people whenever that sort of bias creeps in. What you tell me is important equals you are important, because in this particular group, a lot of people never had the situation where somebody was asking them, what do you think? What would you like to see happen? What would make a better service? That had never been asked for them before. So what you're telling me is important equals you are important. The other thing is to make it easy to talk to people. I had semi-structured interviews, and what happens in grounded theory is, when you do one interview, some of the key elements or themes that come out of that particular interview can inform the next interview that you're planning to conduct. So, as the same in counselling, it's very usually the last sentence that the person says to you is the key sentence, or it's the thing that's on top for them, or it's, in grounded theory, what informs the next interview. So it's important to stay with the person to the very, very end, because you just don't know what they're going to finish up with. Okay, some of the principles of engagement. The people that I spoke with, I did assure them that they would be anonymous, but I don't know if I even got the right name at the start. They may have been called whatever they said they were called, or they may not, but it didn't matter. I was able to anonymise any of the names that I did here anyway. It has to be risk managed. So, for example, what I found was risk managed is dealing with my own fear. And some of those examples are, for example, what if I send out a number, put it out in a paper or whatever, and then somebody rings up and says, oh, you know, trying to sell you something, or they're going to be abusive down the telephone, or all those different other things. So I had to take into account all the different things that potentially could happen by taking this forward. I had to risk manage, for example, if somebody came on the telephone and said, oh, I had a really abusive partner and I'm going to get my own back and I've got a knife here and I'm going to go out and stab him. How would I deal with that if that happened? All of those circumstances you have to be prepared for. Thankfully, none of them happened, but if they had, I at least had a strategy in place that I could call on somebody or get some help if need be. Trust between the interviewer and the interviewee is very important. You have to be upfront with somebody, you have to be open and honest with them, and you find when you do that, they will be open and honest with you. They will give you the information that you want back again. So in order to do that, I had the terms of the consent signed up, that it was an informed consent. People knew that I was recording them, I was taking notes because I told them. I told them what I was going to do with the information. It was for a particular health visiting service to try and deal with the issue of family violence and abuse, and what they were going to tell me was going to be used for that purpose. It was done in their own terms. So for example, if somebody said, I don't want you to record that, I don't want to continue with this interview, I don't want you to do anything to this particular piece, then I had to respect that. What I was dealing with was a lived experience, which is always very difficult, and I had to look at the perpetrator, the victim, and the onlooker and their perceptions. Their perception of whether they were a victim or a perpetrator, or whether they were an onlooker, someone who had just seen violence or seen it happen in their family. Then I was to look at the health visiting service and how that had impacted on the family, and that was quite difficult too, because I was a health visitor by background, and there's definitely bias there when you're doing that. Now, it's very important that you do have the knowledge of what should happen in a health visiting service and what's good practice and what's not good practice, but you can't say, oh, but the health visitor's only trying to help you, because that's not helpful if she's not doing the right thing. You have to be very aware of your own biases before you start into anything like that. Then just a little bit of background to put it in context to the study. Identified a practice need, and that actually happened in the year 2000, but this kind of gives you an idea of the time frame of how long research takes and how slow a process it really is. I discussed the potential for research proposal with my managers, with my colleagues, with academics, and with my family. I appointed my supervisors. I went to UU in Jordanstown to find the supervisors that I needed with that skill set. And anybody who's thinking of wanting to take a piece of research forward, that is really key to success. If you have a good research team, good supervisors behind you, it is challenging anyway, but if you don't have the right supervisors and team beside you, it's even more so. I came up with a title, Grounded Theory Study. I've presented at local women's groups and venues, colleagues, UU, Queen's. I've even presented to the Society of Chaplains in Northern Ireland, the All-Ireland Association of Psychoanalysts, and North Carolina School of Nursing, and at the World Health Organization. And after all that, I completed my study in 2010. Some of the challenges then, whenever you're looking for research within a hard-to-reach group, challenges I would interpret as fears, because a lot of the things that you anticipate will be hard to do sometimes aren't as hard as you think. But you need to be prepared at the same time. So some of the things would, where will I get my sample? And I tried emailing different groups and I didn't get any response from that, so that wasn't a goer. So what I actually did was I went to the Yellow Pages and I got all the section where all the magazines and newspapers in Northern Ireland are printed. And I wrote to all the editors of each of those magazines and newspapers and said, please, I'm a poor student at University of Ulster. Could you put this small advert in your paper? I'm sorry, I can't pay you for this, but you will be contributing to a better standard of care for people who are vulnerable and in a difficult situation. So I honestly don't know how many newspapers actually put that advert in. Some of them, like the Irish News, Newsletter and the Telegraph, go across all of Northern Ireland. So if some of them put that in, I don't know really who all did that. So I did get one phone call from a local newspaper and she said, this number you've given me, is that your own personal mobile number? Are you sure you really want to put that in? So I thought that was very good that somebody was concerned enough about myself that they weren't going to put me at risk by putting my number in. And I got one poor fella, dear help him. He produced a magazine called Plant Hire. Now, for people who work in the construction industry and farming knows what plants is, it's not the wee things in pots, it's the big machinery stuff, and he hired that out. And I had written to him because he was based in Northern Ireland, and he said, "Is this children's books you're doing?" No, actually. So I started explaining to him what it was I was planning to do. He said, "Oh, that's not the line I'm in now. That's not the line I'm in." I says, "No, but men can suffer abuse as well as women, and I want to go as wide and as broad as possible." And then he got away with it. So what he said was, "But we print in Northern Ireland, but we distribute in the south of Ireland." So that was outside my area, so I let him off the hook, so he was okay. Some of my challenges then was how was I going to actually keep myself safe as a lone worker who was going out to do interviews with people. I didn't know somebody could have phoned up, made an appointment to see me, and that might have been bogus. So what I did was I kept my phone with me, obviously. I let somebody know where I was going. I didn't give them all the details, but they knew I'd be in the Europa Hotel from 12 till 1 or whatever. And I always met the people that I was interviewing in a public area so that there was nothing untoward could happen. So that was all sort of risk strategy and management. My other concern was, would this be approved by ethics? Unfortunately, it was, so that was okay. What if nobody responds? Have I a plan B? My plan B was just keep trying, so that's what I did. What happens if there are too many respondents who all respond to the adverts all at once? How will I manage that? How can I get everybody that I need involved? So what I did was, whenever I was posting all the letters out to the different newspapers and magazines, I posted them in batches so that I didn't have them all going out at once. I did them in batches, and that sort of made it more manageable because there was only me doing the interviews. What happened with snowballing work, and what is saturation point? Snowballing is, as I say, whenever I gave my details to somebody else and they passed it on to other people. And what is saturation point? Saturation point is where you're getting no more new information and that you've reached literally saturation point in your sample size. So all of that were all the challenges that I had to think about and give some thought about how I would manage. The participants actually, after the adverts went to press, I had one girl that I lost. That means that I didn't get to interview her. The contacts that were established were 16, and the male perpetrators, as you can see there was one male victim, one male onlooker, one female perpetrator, and the female victims were 11, and that was as a result of the snowballing. So the snowballing can actually introduce bias if you're getting a lot of one population and not very much of the other. So that's just something to look out for. And then the female onlookers, there was one as well. The geographical area, I just broke them down into the different areas. How I knew where they were from was either from the telephone post, the code of their telephone number, or where I was meeting up with them. So that actually is a slight typo there. There was 2 in Tyrone instead of 1. So it kind of was across all of Northern Ireland apart from Fermanagh, which I think was the one girl I lost. So that's Fermanagh. Some of the issues that then I had to look at in consent, I had to make sure that it was informed consent. I had to make sure that the people knew, for example, that if they were going to tell me something that was risky, or they were going to do something to themselves or to an ex-partner or whatever, that I knew how to manage that and do something with it. They needed to know, as I say, all the detail about the recorded interviews. If they wanted to have somebody with them, I gave them helpline numbers, and I had to adapt that for telephone interviews. I wanted them to sign something or say that they'd seen the consent or something like that when I was physically meeting them, but on telephone interviews you can't do that, so I had to adapt that for telephone. Some of the data then that I collected, moving swiftly on, was that the health visiting service, surprise, surprise, varied from absolutely brilliant to really, really rubbish, or it could have been good if they had done this or asked that question or done something differently. So that's what you would expect really whenever you are taking on this type of a research project. Trust and engagement are key to effective intervention, and the intervention depends on the risk, depends on the individual, and depends on the relationship. There is no one size fits all in this type of a study. The management of risky situations are key. There are examples where people said, I called the police because I really thought my life was in danger. I did it all myself. In other words, they had planned the escape from very start to the very end without anybody else knowing about it. Or I called my family in for support because I needed somebody on my side. The investment in the individual situation really does pay off whenever the health visitor is doing their assessment and planning with the person or the family what they need to do next. And when a victim requests help from a professional, it's usually as their last resort, and sometimes professionals can be dangerous too. And that can be in respect of how they deal with it and how they engage with the person and how they can call in help at the right time. Some additional data that's collected was the similarities and difference in victim and perpetrators' behaviours. Victims really do not want to go over and over the detail of what has happened to them over again, and that is because the details actually are really quite painful to them, and to go over and over it again is reinventing the pain, which doesn't need to happen. The recovery processes develop from violence and abuse, which at that stage, the victims always have a little bit of hope that things will change and get better. The perpetrators probably feel guilt and remorse, and I'll never do that again. And then it goes to a stage of absolute despair because they realise that no, this is the way life is. It's not going to change, it's only going to get worse. And then into growth and development. Trust is a key factor in any relationship, personal and professional. So in these abusive families, when trust is gone, it's all gone. And that's when it's time to move on or make changes. So what was the learning from this study? And I have a quote here from Henry Ford, which I think sums it all up. Engagement is coming together in the beginning, keeping together is progress, and working together is success. And that's me. Thank you very much.